Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Summer Wine and Beer Recommendations at the Algonquin College Summer Market. I'm Leanne. I'm the events programmer for the AC Hub. We are joined today by sommelier and alumni Greg Nyman. Greg has been enjoying wine for many years, but only began his formal studies in 2015. He is a graduate of the Algonquin College Sommelier program, receiving his Ontario certificate with honors. Working for Champagne and Wines, Greg enjoys leading tastings, sharing experiences, and helping others pursue their passion for wines, beer, and whiskey. He is an instructor with the Algonquin College Sommelier program and serves on the board of directors at the National Capital Sommelier Guild. So before we get started, I'm just going to share a couple of housekeeping items. We kindly ask you to keep your microphone muted during the presentation. However, we encourage you to keep your camera on for some face-to-face time. Along the bottom of the screen, you will find a button entitled Chat. When you select this option, a pop-up window appears on the right-hand side of your screen. Following Greg's presentation, we welcome you to ask questions in one of two ways. The first option is to type your question in the chat box, and I will read it out loud. And the second option is to press the raise hand function located within the Participants tab to be called on to ask your question live. So to kick off today's event, we would like everyone to now open the chat tab along the bottom of the screen. In a couple of seconds, I'm going to give everyone a fun question to answer. We would like you to answer the question by typing in the chat, but please wait to press send until I say so, because we're all going to send our answers at the same time. So the question is, are you a wine or a beer fan? So we'll let everyone type their answer. Just give everyone a couple seconds. Okay, and I'm going to count down from 3, and we're all going to send our answers at the same time. So 1, 2, 3, send. That's awesome. I love the amount of people that said both. Thank you so much for sharing your response. We would now like to welcome sommelier and Algonquin College alumni Greg Nyman to take the virtual stage to share his expertise on beer and wine recommendations.
Thank you, Leanne. Can everybody hear me? I think so. Thank you, Leanne, and colleagues from the AC Hub. This is a little unusual to host a beer and wine tasting when we're not tasting beer and wine. Maybe some of you are, and besides the usual social responsibility considerations, I encourage people to enjoy a glass of beer or wine at almost any time of the day. It might be a little early for some. I'll be tasting some wines. I'll be sharing some of my thoughts and impressions on some beer and wines that I've purchased at the LCBO. I'll be tasting, but like a good sommelier, especially in the morning hours, and I do a lot of tastings and some teaching in the morning. I'll be using my spittoon. So apologies if this is foreign to you and you see me doing some of this, because it's just good practice, especially when you're in my industry, and there can be days where we may taste 50 plus wines. So if we're not spitting, we're falling on the floor pretty quickly, especially early in the day. So thanks again for joining us. I was just spent a bit of time scrolling through, seeing some smiling faces. I'm glad you could join us today. Day before Canada Day. LCBO is still open. I don't know when they're open till this afternoon or this evening, but if there's any of these wines that pique your interest or beers, you still have some time to pick them up before Canada Day, which I guess for a few people is going to mark the start of call it a long weekend. But regardless, summer wine and beers, we typically think something a little lighter, bar or restaurant. So I'm going to keep it on the lighter side. These are not light beers and light wines necessarily, but like I said, on the lighter side, and sort of walk through my impressions. And again, if there's something that piques your interest, I'll I'll make sure that I'll try and get the label where everybody can see it. Lighter side, we tend to refer to some of these as summer sippers, all available at the LCBO. One of them is in vintages, but it's widely available, and I think it'll be around for a while. My sort of thoughts and in discussion with Leanne was that we wanted them to not only be available but affordable. So we're not talking expensive bottles of wine here. More at the, I'll call it at the lower end of the price scale, but certainly not at the lower end of the quality scale. As I go through, you may have some questions, and Leanne's already indicated how to pose them. I'll make a few perhaps food pairing type suggestions. This is not a wine and food pairing discussion, but so much of what we do, if we enjoy alcohol, food, beer, wine, etc., quite often that involves food. So I'll make a few suggestions along the way as well. So the first, and I'm going to pour as we go. I'm going to start with our beers. First is a Radler, Stiegl Radler, grapefruit Radler. And, well, that's probably enough. So many of you have had Radlers and enjoyed Radlers, hopefully. You might not know the background of the Radler. Radler actually means cyclist in German. And the story dates back to the early 1900s, 1922, I believe, when a gentleman called Franz Zeber Kug owned an inn with a restaurant, was running low on beer, and he had a lot of cyclists coming through during the day who wanted some sort of refreshment during their time cycling, and he mixed essentially what beer that he had with a lemon soda or a lemon type drink to make a beer cocktail essentially. And put some marketing spin around it, I'm sure at the spur of the moment, called it Radler, and it became the kind of the ode to the German cyclists. So we see Radlers produced all over the world. A lot of our craft beer companies locally are producing Radlers. This is from Stiegl in Salzburg, Austria, a really good example of a grapefruit Radler. And the nice thing about German, Austrian, and a number of other European beers is they're still making real beer. And by that, I mean they follow the German purity law, which means that beer consists of really only a few things: malted barley, hops, and water. Back in 1516, when they came up with this law, they didn't even realize that yeast was the catalyst to make alcohol. So yeast has been added to that law to make German beer, and you can't make any other kind than with those four basic ingredients in Germany. A lot of other countries have followed suit. So back to our Radler, you'll notice the color. We're going to talk about the appearance, the aromas, and the taste, and maybe a little bit about how it feels in the mouth. So first view is it's kind of hazy. Got that yellow appearance. You might normally serve this in a taller glass. I've just got some standard beer glasses at home. This might typically be served in a taller glass. And yes, please, when you're serving beer, sometimes it's not convenient, but beer really is meant to be drunk out of a glass. Yeah, I drink it out of a can around a campfire when I'm camping as well. But when I have the opportunity, which is most times, I like to pour it in a glass. I like to look at it, but also gives you a chance to smell the beer, take all that in, and some of the carbonation is lifted out. The carbonation isn't as heavy, but it's still well carbonated. This is 50% beer, a golden lager, and 50% fruit juices, primarily grape juice, but also some orange and lemon. When I smell it, we're getting citrus right away. a little bit in the background, you get some of those beer aromas, typically a malted barley, almost a cereal type aroma. Oh, I forgot to use my spittoon. It's that early in the morning. Flavors are what you'd expect given what you're smelling. Grapefruit, citrus, the sharpness of some acidity, and you know there's beer in there. You wouldn't, if you were served this blind, you might not identify it as a beer, but knowing that it's half beer, most people will pick up on a bit of that, call it beeriness. It is light, 2.5% alcohol. So if we're cycling, and I am not suggesting for a moment that anybody should be drinking and driving whatever wheel they're behind, or doing any sort of activity in public that may bring harm to themselves or others. But again, just the origins of this is that it is a super light alcoholic beverage, and still today, whether it's in Germany or other parts of the world, people will enjoy a drink along the way. And if you're going to do that when you're doing any of these sorts of activities, again, something that is really, really on the light side would be recommended. Serve it cold. Serve it 3 to 6 degrees, whatever your fridge temperature is, right out of the fridge and into the glass. This is meant to be crisp, refreshing, and served cold. Food pairings might include, well, just about anything really, but Asian dishes. Some of that citrus and the beer can complement. Thai food, Chinese food, that sort of thing, quite nicely. Some people even try this with a fruity dessert, not too sweet dessert, but something with a lot of fruit in it. This can complement, and the slightest bitterness of both the beer and the grapefruit have that effect of making your dessert maybe taste just a little sweeter. So it's a nice offset. $3.25 a can. This is in my house and up at my cottage. This is a staple for the summer. Something that a lot of people enjoy, especially earlier in the day, mid-afternoon. You don't want to get bogged down, feel weighted by the alcohol. This is an ideal sort of start to the afternoon. Okay. So that's Austria. The next two beers that I have are Canadian beers, craft beers from one from around here in Ottawa, Big Rig Premium Pilsner. And I'm going to pour that. I'm going to show you how it's poured all the way to the top. Start with it on its side so it's not getting too foamy too quickly. But we really do want a head on the beer, maybe a 1.5 centimeters. That actually helps to call it protect the rest of the bubbles from evaporating or escaping too quickly. So this is our Pilsner. This isn't a light beer per se. 5.2% alcohol. So as beers go, this is what you might call an average, especially by Canadian standards. It is a Pilsner, though, a lager, which tend to be on the lighter, crisper side. So again, we're thinking about perhaps a summer afternoon, late afternoon, or into the evening, a drink before dinner, that sort of thing. Pilsner comes from the Czech city Pilsen. 1842 is when the first Pilsners were brewed and developed, different from ales, which have hundreds of years, actually, multiple centuries, thousands of years, really, history behind them. Pilsner in the world of beer is relatively young, although 1842 doesn't make it that young. Big Rig Brewery. Big Rig was the nickname of Chris Phillips, an Ottawa Senators defenseman, and he had a share and heavily promoted the brewery and the restaurants. It's since been sold off, but still remains a craft brewer, largely independent craft brewer. Been around not even 10 years yet, and they make quite a nice series of beer. We can see that color is a rather pale to medium straw gold. If I poured, and I'm not going to name any brands, but some of those big brands that we might be used to, Canadian or American brands, a lot of times you'll see them lighter. This is following more or less the German purity law as well. So in this beer is malted barley, hops. It's made with yeast and water. What we get from a lot of the other big brands, every beer needs a sugar source. And so what we get from a lot of big brands is or a starch source that becomes sugar for the yeast to eat. A lot of times we'll get corn syrup or rice or something like that that beers can be made of, and throw in a little hops. But these craft brewers are making them really the original ingredients for beer, and that's why they come across typically as more flavorful, still lighter, crisper, an overall profile, but it does typically have some more flavor than some of those mass-produced big commercial breweries. So straw gold, typical for this style of Pilsner. Aromas. Now I can sense that malted barley, or that roasted barley, a light roast, the grain. It's also got a bit of a bread dough or yeasty element to it. Again, not surprising. It's yeast is one of the key ingredients, and I do get the slightest bit of a floral element, and I'm not going to identify what the flower is, but a bit of a floral element, and that comes from hops. Hops are what give beer the bitter property when you're tasting it. But the aromas quite often come off as floral or even tropical. I mean, there's no flowers added to this, and if it was a different style of beer with certain other hops, it may come across as tropical. Somebody might think, oh, there's a bit of pineapple in there. Nobody's dumped pineapple in the fermentation tank. That comes from the ingredients that would normally go into beer. There's hundreds of different versions of hops, each of them with their own characteristics. So let's us taste this one, or let me be your taster. Yeah, exactly what I'd expect. Crisp. When I say light, not light in alcohol, but nice and crisp. Certainly nice and refreshing, poured at a nice cold temperature. Again, you get that slight maltiness to it, a bit of the hop bitterness, but it's not really hoppy. Well, I'm going to taste one that's hoppier in a second. It's not really hoppy. This is the kind of beer. Again, serve it cold at 4, 5, 7 degrees Celsius. Serve it nice and cold. In terms of food pairing, this will go with just about anything. It's burger season, it's grilled chicken season, it's steak season. You would not go wrong if you had a group of people over and you were looking for a couple of different beers to have something like this, a standard lager or pilsner. Personally, I'd make it a craft brew, because we want to have some flavor there, and not just the refreshing element. It's not a light beer, but it's in that lighter, crisper style. The last of our beers, certainly last but not least, is an IPA. Great Lakes Brewing Sunnyside Session IPA. So there's two things there. One is IPA. IPA stands for India Pale Ale. And it generally, for number one, it's an ale. It's a different brewing process. It's a top fermentation. Um, but IPAs typically have a hoppier profile. So the bitterness of the hops comes through. It's more apparent certainly than a lighter lager. India Pale Ale has an interesting history, dating back to the days of the English Empire, where English were all over the world, and they certainly enjoyed a beer and wanted beer. Problem is that beer would spoil to some of the far-flung places like India. So what brewers understood or came to understand was that hops are actually a very good preservative of beer. So by upping the alcohol content somewhat, but certainly adding much more hops than they might normally in a typical ale, they were able to build that preservative property in the beer and ship it around the world, and it became known as India Pale Ale or IPA. The session element, and not all IPAs, and certainly most IPAs are not session ales. There's the can. Not all IPAs are session ales. Session simply means suitable for a drinking session, really. So it's lighter alcohol. A lot of IPAs are higher alcohol, so higher than 5%. They'll verge into 6 and 7 or more. This is 3.9% alcohol. So akin to a standard light beer that, again, some of the big brewers might make. But a lot more flavor, a lot more aromas coming from it. And one might think that it's a stronger ale than it is because of the stuff that's present in there. So, but rest assured that of that stuff, alcohol is not high. It's actually lower. So it would be a light ale, put in a different word, in a different way. Great Lakes Brewing. It's actually one of Canada's oldest independent craft breweries. It's been around for 33 years, based in Etobicoke, and they make a whole range of very interesting beers. This one has the addition. It's not chemical additions or weird flavor components. There's some flaked oats that are part of the additions pre-fermentation to bump up some of the flavor profile in this one. So hops, yeast, water, barley malt, and some flaked oats. Nice thick head on this. Now it's subsided a bit, but it was thicker and seems a little creamier. Again, not unusual. Kind of hazy gold color. This is where, again, there's nothing tropical. There's no pineapple. There's no citrus added to this. But on the nose, you get some hints of citrus, orange peel, a bit of unripe pineapple. Almost a bit of earthiness too. .25 IBUs, those are international bitterness units. Makes it sort of medium low in terms of its hoppiness. But if you like a beer with a bit more of that bitterness, a lot more on the nose, but you don't want a lot of alcohol, then you might want to consider either this beer exactly or anything else that's referred to as a session ale. If you see session ale and you look at the alcohol content on the can or bottle, you'll see that it's lower. And a lot of craft brewers make a session ale. Yeah, quite nice. $2.90 for a tall can. One of the nice food pairings when it comes to beers like this, believe it or not, and some people don't until you experience it, they might not believe it, is hot spicy foods. Hoppy beers, although they taste bitter, they really have this effect in the mouth of giving you relief from really hot spicy food. I love burn through the table hot spicy Indian food. This is a nice complement to that. It gives you that refreshment, gives you some relief from the heat, more than a lager would. believe it or not. So despite call it the heaviness or the flavor profile that's more apparent than a lager, quite nice with Indian food, hot wings, even pizza with a lot of hot peppers on it, that sort of thing. Any of these beers would be quite nice on their own as well. So those are our three beers. I would pan over and show them to you on my desk, but my desk is an absolute disaster, and I don't want to embarrass myself or embarrass you by showing you what's on here. So hopefully there's a few questions, and we'll get to them shortly. I'm going to run through our wines now. Again, thinking on the lighter side, not all light, but on the lighter side. With wines, it's the same general approach to beers. We look at the wine, we smell the wine, we taste it. With wines, there can be some other complexities, and we're looking structurally at in terms of what we can taste: acidity levels, alcohol levels, sweetness, tannins in red wines. Excuse me, that overall texture or mouthfeel, the weight in our mouth. This one is going to be about as light. I got to get there. We go. As light as it gets. This is the Aveleda Vino Verde. The interesting thing about this wine, now you can't see it from the resolution isn't fine enough. The interesting thing about this wine, Vino Verde means green wine. It comes from Portugal, up in Minho province in the northwest of Portugal. Green wine really means young wine. So this is they are typically white wines. It comes with, it's not a sparkling wine, so it's not kept under pressure with a cage to be released like champagne or other sparkling wines, but it does have a little effervescence to it. And I can see some really, really small bubbles lifting up through, and when you taste it, it's got a bit of a spritz. As wines go, when we think about alcohol contents from 12.5 through to 15 or more percent, this is quite light. This is 11%. Some Vino Verdes will be as low as about 9%. It's got that spritziness, overall very light, nice high acidity. If you want to have a glass of white wine out in the patio somewhere or on the dock, I strongly suggest this wine. It's not sweet, it's a dry wine. All the wines that I've got this morning are dry wines, and it does have a bit of a green tinge, so it's a pale lemon yellow color with a bit of a green tinge. Immediately when I put it to my nose, I get green apples, citrus like lemon, lime, a little bit of a white flower like a acacia flower, something, a white flower. And all those things are confirmed when I taste it as well. 6 grams per liter of sugar, which makes it dry, 11% alcohol. Serve this nice and cool, 8-10 degrees. Drink it on its own. Serve it with something lighter. Sushi would be a great example. Salmon or tuna, a fatty fish type sushi, a white protein, a lightly grilled protein, a salad, that sort of thing. To me, that defines summer sipper. Now, speaking of summer sippers, 'tis the season for rosés, and I have a François Dulac Côte de Provence rosé from Provence in France. Wines from this area can be a number of different grapes. This one is predominantly Grenache, which is a red grape, but they crush it and they draw the juice off fairly quickly, so it picks up a bit of the color from the grape skins. That's a lovely, again, it doesn't always translate, but sort of a pale salmon pink color. A little higher in alcohol, 13%, still quite on the nose. With rosés, you get this, it is almost quite literally, they're basically white wines, but you do get these influences that you might get from a red wine as well. So this will have a combination Nice and clean, citrus, lemon, strawberry, peach. A little bit of a floral element, not much. Yeah, when I taste it, you get that berry fruit, light berry fruit, strawberry, maybe raspberry, bit of lemon zest. On the nose, it smells more like juice, a bit of lemon zest, not bitter, but it's just adds to that refreshment or the crispness. Again, I think things like grilled chicken, a Santa Fe type salad with avocado. Nice thing about anything that's got some fat in it, whether it's vegetable fat or fat from a meat or protein, you want a wine like this with a nice lifted acidity to help cleanse. It's, the wine helps with the enjoyment of food, and every time you take a sip of wine, it cleanses the palate. Be quite nice. So that's our summer rosé. I think we're doing all right for time. We've got 2 more wines. So we've been to Portugal and France. Now we're in Niagara, Cave Spring, Gamay. Gamay is the grape variety associated with Beaujolais. So if you enjoy Beaujolais from the very south of Burgundy, you would probably enjoy this wine. Lighter in style for a red wine. Fairly light or pale ruby red. Right away on the nose, I get this combination of red and darker fruits. So cherries and strawberry, blackberry, a little bit of red licorice, which is not unusual when it comes to Gamay or Beaujolais from France. Now this has spent a little bit of time in a barrel, I'm sure. So you get a bit of a wood element, but not heavy duty. A little bit of cedar, but also some of the vanillas and a little bit of chocolate that they're actual chemical compounds that are extracted from the wood. Nice acidity. We call this medium plus acidity. It's not high. It's a dry wine. Again, 13% alcohol. Starts off with a bit of tart cherry. Some of those other darker fruits creep in. Again, I get the repeat of a little bit of vanilla and chocolate as well. Fairly soft mouthfeel. It does have, red wines have tannins, and that's what kind of dries the mouth as well. This one, I'll call it medium-low tannin, so it doesn't have that astringent impact on it, but there's a little bit there. That acidity, very nice with tomato-based either sauces or, again, something like a pizza would go quite well. $15.95. The previous wine, the rosé, was $17.95, and our Vino Verde was $12.60. With our last wine, and I think that brings us in just about on time, Leanne, for questions. Our last wine is a Côte du Rhône. Again, we're back in France. This is a blend. So we're in the Rhône Valley. Some of these blends typically come from further south in the Rhône Valley. This is a deeper color, deep red, deep ruby red, almost purple. It's a blend of Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvèdre. So these are quite often referred to as GSM blends. This would be what I would call a classic GSM blend. Primarily Grenache, but also Syrah and Mourvèdre. Syrah also goes by the name Shiraz in Australia, in case that sounds familiar. Dark cherry, dark fruit on the nose. Dark cherry, blackberries, dark plums, some dried herbs and spices, vanilla, dark chocolate. (14.5% alcohol. This is not the wine that you're having at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the dock when it's 30 degrees out there. Maybe it is, but for most people it isn't. This is the wine that you're enjoying when somebody brings the burgers or the steaks or the ribs. Something that's got that caramelized nature of being off the grill, maybe a little smokiness to it. This is the wine that you'd like to have. Serve it closer to room temperature, maybe a little chilled. Medium plus acidity, a little more tannin. Tannin's okay. Don't be afraid of tannins, especially when you're having grilled meats with a little bit of fat on them. It cuts through the fats quite nicely. Makes you want to have more. A heavier body, medium plus body, so not quite full-bodied, but almost there. This is the one that I got from Vintages. So everything else is from the LCBO regular list. This one's from Vintages. It's not going to break the bank. $20.95. It won't be around forever, but it's widely available, and it'll be around for some time. If you enjoyed it like I did, if you're interested and want to buy a bottle, I'm sure that'll be in stock your local LCBO over the next week or two before it disappears. I was up at my cottage last weekend, and I have a smoker, and I smoked an entire brisket. It took me 10 hours. I still have some left. I might sneak a glass of this at lunchtime and enjoy some leftover brisket with this. I think that little bit of smokiness and certainly the body and that fruit would go really well with a nice smoked brisket with just a little bit of barbecue sauce on it. So those are our wines. And before we entertain any questions, again, I'd just like to say thank you to Leanne and her colleagues. This is a different kind of tasting. Like I said, I don't believe any of you are drinking beers and wines this morning, but we always feel in my profession to remind people to drink responsibly. So I'm going to say that just because, even though it's 11:39, I want to remind people that. If you want a list of these wines and beers, I'm quite happy to send them to you in case you haven't been writing notes furiously, but you want a little bit more. It's an Algonquin College address, Nyman G, N-Y-M-A-N-G @algonquin.com. I will be quiet for a moment, and Leanne can ask us a few questions on your behalf.
Thank you so much, Greg. That was an awesome session. We do still have some time left for questions. So just a reminder, you can type your question in the chat and I'll read it out loud on your behalf, or you can open the participants tab, raise your virtual hand, and I'll call on you to ask your question to Greg live. And while we're waiting for some questions to roll in, I'm just gonna post, I was following along and I found all of your beer and wine recommendations online. So I'm just gonna repost the links for both of those in the chat. And I want to apologize, none of them are LCBO links because the LCBO's website is under maintenance. So that's why they're going to random sites. But as Gregory said, they're all purchasable at the LCBO.
Yes, they are.
Don't see anything coming in yet. Oh, here we go. Do you have any recommendation on amber beers?
On amber beers, there is one. What's it called? Oh boy, first question, I'm drawing a blank. It's called Nut Brown. So it's a little darker, but it drinks like an amber beer. It's quite nice. I also know that I live in Stittsville, and just down the road, and it's not a plug, it's just I enjoy their beers. Covered Bridge Brewing. They have two different amber beers that are quite nice as well. Covered Bridge Brewing on Iber Road in Stittsville. Some of their beers are available at the LCBO, but these days these guys really appreciate when you pop in or arrange for delivery of beers with our whole COVID situation. I promised I wouldn't say COVID this time, but I did anyway.
Do you have any recommendations on sours?
On sours, I wish I did. So I mean, full disclosure, although I enjoy beer and I've studied a number of times and I've taught some classes in beers. My passion, if you will, I call it my expertise, is more on the wine side. So although I've enjoyed a number of sours, I just don't, none come to mind.
No worries. The next question is about wine. So this person is a light white wine drinker in the summer, and would you recommend a Pinot Grigio?
Yeah, I would recommend that you go with Italian Pinot Grigios. So if you see, and again, maybe brands don't come to mind right away, but up in northern Italy, Alto Adige, that area, and it'll be quite apparent if you go into either just the regular list area or in vintages, and you look for Pinot Grigios from northern Italy. They're still nice and light and crisp and refreshing, but to my view, when compared to, let's say, a California Pinot Grigio or some of what's being produced in Ontario, they just have a little more intensity or concentration of flavors. So still very light, but a little closer to drinking wine rather than something that's perhaps a little thin sometimes.
And do you have a recommendation for a red ale beer?
A red
Ale beer.
Not. I was gonna say what not to buy, but again, I don't have a specific recommendation for a red ale. A lot of these craft brewers, if they're making a red ale, just try it. I mean, we can go to the LCBO, or you can go to a brewery and pick up a can or two for $3 a pop, and it's worth trying. I'm sorry I don't have a specific one in mind, but if I'd known things that would be veering a little more towards the beer side of things, I would have boned up on a few more and had a few more actual labels in mind.
And last question, just being mindful of the time, can you recommend another red wine on top of the one that you shared today?
Well, if we're thinking again, summer and barbecues, and so we've got Gamay on the lighter side. If you want something lighter, you may want to consider a Pinot Noir, and there's Pinot Noirs from all over the world, really, that are quite nice. Pinot Noir from Burgundy, so it's going to, in the LCBO, go to the vintages section. Don't be scared by vintages, by the way. Lot of so many wines are in that $18 to $25 price point. You're looking for Bourgogne or Burgundy, and if it's a red wine, it is a Pinot Noir. On the fuller bodied side, again, barbecues, grilled meats, I would go with a California Zinfandel. A lot of people here or have traditionally heard of Zinfandel, and they've thought about rosés. The real expression of Zinfandel is as a red wine. They're typically moderate tannin, but really big dark fruit, higher alcohol, real plummy, sort of jammy without being sweet, and a really good complement to barbecued meats. California Zinfandels are kind of the benchmark. Gnarly Head, Sagacio, Ravenswood, different price points, but some very nice wines.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg, for sharing your expertise with us today. We really appreciate it. I have went ahead and reposted for one last time the beers that you recommended today and the wines. And
Excellent.
Right now I'm going to go ahead and put your Twitter there for anybody who wants to follow you on Twitter, connect with you that way if they have more questions. If anyone wants to rewatch today's event, we are recording it, and it'll be up by end of the week following Canada Day on our AC Always Connected events page. So I've just posted that in the chat. And one last link to share with you guys today. This is the start of Summer Market. This was one of the first events. We have up next is Jason Blaine. And then we've got 2 more info session timings following this afternoon. So I'm posting the link for that to sign up for more great events today. But thank you again for taking part, and we'll see you at Jason Blaine starting right now. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.